Hey everybody, what's up? It's 8 o'clock, so it is time to go. So we are going to go ahead and get started immediately. So welcome back. I hope that everybody's doing well today, tonight. We know we are getting there. We are very, very close to the beginning here. We have our AP test tomorrow. Many of you, 12 hours from now, you might be beginning and opening up that test book. Some of you might not have taken paper tests in a long, long time, but many of you are going to be doing that tomorrow. So I want to wish everybody the best on that tomorrow. And again, just welcome everybody that's here right now. I am really glad that so many of you have decided to use my videos and whatnot to help you to prepare for the AP test. So this video, this live, it's not really a video, so this live stream, this is all about you. And I'm going to try to answer as many questions as you have in the live stream. So I am coming to you with nothing, all right, except hopefully some answers to questions. I know that there have been tons and tons of questions that have been thrown about in the chats in other videos, and a lot of times it's tough to get to those because I'm, trying to teach something or review something. So definitely want to try to help everybody out, answer as many questions as I possibly can for you. And, that's pretty much what we're going to do. I do have there's a few people saying something about mic volume. Make sure that you have on YouTube that the volume is all the way up, or that turn up your volume on your device or whatever you're watching on. I do have everything set to max volumes, and most people seem to say that it's okay, so I'm not sure what the issue is there, but all right, so I'm going to start answering some questions in the chat and try to get to as many of them as I can. Obviously, it's going to be moving pretty fast, but so I know I won't get everybody, but I will try to help out as many people as I can. So I do just want to say hello again to 224 people that are here currently. Okay, so Sophia, I'm not going to go up further than that. So Sophia asks, what happens if we don't know the name of like an act or vocabulary word, especially on an FRQ? Don't worry about it. So very rarely will an FRQ be asking you where it's something that you need to know the name of the law or you need to know the specific vocab term if they don't give it to you. So just describe it and you'll be fine. So like if you didn't know the name Gun-Free School Zones Act, no worries, describe it. It would say something about Congress passing a law that banned guns at school. That's what you need to do. So don't stress about that kind of thing. What documents do you predict? I have no idea. I'm not going to do predictions. Bree, oh boy, this test is paper and pencil. Well, tomorrow it is. Digital will be May 20th and June 3rd. You're welcome. Jason says, could you explain what a political institution and government entity are? One of the practice FRQs I've read uses these terms, and the wording seems purposely vague. I agree with you, Jason. That does sound purposely vague. A political institution, we have lots of political institutions. Congress is an institution. Bureaucratic agencies, interest groups, political parties, the executive branch, the presidency, like these are all political institutions. Government entity, so it would be most of those things, but not things like parties or interest groups, because those are outside of government. Those would be civil society or parts of civil society, but yeah. It does seem a little bit vague, but yeah, don't worry about that. How much time do we get? So Marvin asks, how much time do we get for every part of the exam? Again, timing stuff. You have 80 minutes for the multiple choice portion. There are 55 questions, so you have way more time than you would really need on multiple choice. And you have 100 minutes for 4 FRQs. They recommend 20 minutes for the first 3 FRQs and 40 minutes for the argument essay. Kayla says, could we go through amendments super fast? I mean, that would take a few minutes, even going really fast. I'm going to go really fast. First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, assembly, press, petition for redress of grievances. Second, bear arms. Third, quarter soldiers. I mean, you can look this up. Fourth, no unreasonable search and seizure. Fifth Amendment, you have several things. Due process, grand jury, no double jeopardy, eminent domain are all there in the Fifth Amendment. Sixth Amendment, trial, speedy and public trial by jury in criminal cases. Seventh Amendment, trial by jury in civil cases. Eighth Amendment, no cruel or unusual punishment or excessive fines or bail. Ninth Amendment, unenumerated rights of the people. 10th Amendment, states' rights. So there's your Bill of Rights, but you can look those up. You don't need me to say them out loud for you, Kayla. I'm probably not going to pronounce your name correctly, but Ashika says, what's the biggest difference between PACs and super PACs? There are two differences between a regular PAC and a super PAC. So both of them raise money. They can both raise unlimited amounts of money to support a candidate and to spend money independent of the campaign. Two differences regard like who can give money and how the money can be used. So the real name for a super PAC is Independent Expenditure Only Committee, which means that that's all a super PAC can do. It can only spend money independent of campaigns. They can give $0 directly to a candidate. A regular PAC can give a very small amount of money directly to a candidate. The other difference is that corporations, labor unions cannot give money to a regular PAC, but they can give money to a super PAC. Those are your two differences. Queen says, would you do a review a week before May 20th? Because that's when I have my exam. That's when my students have their exam. So yes, I will definitely be back. I have, more cahoots, and we'll be back. Don't worry. Sophia, I already answered that. Matthew says, how do we reference the Constitution in the argument essay? Oh, I think it just scrolled me down a little bit. It definitely did. So I just skipped a whole bunch of people, I think. So I'm just going to scroll up just a little bit. All right, Bright PE says, what's the difference between Keynesian and supply-side economics? So Keynesian is more on the liberal side, typically. Supply-side is more on the conservative side, as far as like who typically favors each of those. Keynesians think that when the economy is in a recession, that the best thing the government can do is to spend money. So they favor increased government spending to like reduce unemployment and to get the economy back on track. Supply-siders say no, the best thing to do is to cut taxes. So cutting taxes is going to allow businesses to spend more money, hire more workers, etc. So they disagree about the right way to like expand the economy when things are going badly. Student 55, please don't have panic attacks. You're going to be okay. This is just a test. Do the best that you can, and that's all you can do. And you move on, and we live good, productive lives and be good people. Melissa, what is the difference between judicial restraint and judicial activism? So these are both judicial philosophies. We are talking about what's the proper role for the Supreme Court and for justices. Should they be more free to use their power of judicial review, or should they kind of be more limited? And the terms give you an idea. So activism versus restraint. Restraint says, let's try not to use judicial review too often. Let's try not to strike down and rule things unconstitutional that were done by democratically elected branches. So let's mostly try to defer to Congress, to the president, to state and local governments, and let them make policy because the people elected them, and this will allow us to be more democratic. Judicial activism is more of the idea of, if the other branches are doing something wrong, then let's fix it. Let's solve the problem. Let's, create progress. Let's make new policy. So again, it's just the idea that kind of that debate about how strong or weak should the court be as a policymaker. We're up to 390 people right now. So again, I want to welcome everybody who's come in since the last time I said hello. If you guys do want to show me love by hitting the like button, you know that I do appreciate it. So I want to thank you for that. If you haven't checked out the Ultimate Review Packet and you're looking for some practice tests, that's one good way to do that. So you can check that out. The link's in the description. And if you haven't subscribed, then definitely help me out. Do me a favor, subscribe. Do yourself a favor, because I do have lots of good content on everything you need to get through this AP test. Gia asks, what exactly is meant by due process? So it comes from like the Due Process Clause in the 5th Amendment, and then very similarly in the 14th, talks about people not being allowed to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Essentially, this is a very broad term that means that like your rights aren't being violated. So if you get arrested, there are certain things that have to happen, right? You have due process rights. So they have to follow the procedure properly. They have to, arrest you, or they can't search you unreasonably. When they arrest you, they have to bring you to a judge, charge you with a crime, or release you. allow you to have an attorney, trial by jury, all of these things. It's a very broad, like, umbrella term. Ananiah asks, what's the due process clause difference in the 5th and 14th Amendment? So the 14th one is the same exact words. It just says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. So it's the basis for incorporation in the 14th Amendment, where it's saying, okay, yeah, it said the federal government couldn't do that, deprive you of life, liberty, property without due process, but now states can't either. And then that becomes interpreted in the 1920s to mean that states can't take away, because of that word liberty, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That states can't take away your fundamental liberties either. So things like your freedom of speech, and then eventually other things, press, bear arms, all of those things. Andrew asks, do we need to know which committees are which? I'm not entirely sure what his question is asking. I think if you mean standing committees versus conference committees, yes. Standing committees are your basic, they exist in both the House and the Senate. They're permanent. They are, they deal with legislation when it's first proposed. They're sent to committees. That's where the edits, the revisions, the markups, all of that stuff's done in standing committee. Conference committees, on the other hand, these occur, they're a type of joint committee. So members of the House and the Senate would be part of a conference committee. These are only formed when the House and Senate pass different versions of the same bill. And the role of the conference committee is to try to come up with a negotiated, compromised version of the bill so that the president might be able to sign one single version of a bill and it actually become a law. Lucas asks which amendment is the right to privacy, and the answer is none. That's kind of the idea, is that the Supreme Court discovered the right to privacy. They said that they discovered it in the penumbras of the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. No, you don't need to know that. But the idea was, they said, all right, based on these other things, you have the right to choose who to assemble with. Soldiers can't come into your house in peacetime. You have protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. So you take all these things together, and it's reasonable that we have an expected right of privacy. Abby, they're not going to ask you about 501c4s, so don't worry about that. There are some technical differences. Those are groups that aren't politics isn't their primary purpose, and so they don't have to disclose where their money's coming from, but you don't need to know that. Spider-Man asks about subcommittees, how are they different from regular committees? So they're just committees within a committee. So let's say that we have an education committee, okay, in the House of Representatives. There can be subcommittees, and those subcommittees are going to deal with more specific elements of educational policy, right? And so depending on what that bill is, it can get sent to the appropriate subcommittee. And again, the same thing, AP exam, you don't need to worry about that really. They're going to do work on the bill, edit, revise, mark up, hold hearings, all of that stuff. Do we need to know all of the amendments? That's from Nugget. No, there's ones that don't matter. Okay. Jody Epic asks, do we need to know the different articles in the Constitution? Yeah, you definitely need to know that Article 1 is Congress, Article 2 is the presidency, Article 3 is the judiciary, for sure. Aiden says, could you quickly overview the purpose of bureaucratic agencies? So again, broadly speaking, the purpose of the bureaucracy is to implement and to enforce federal law. That's the purpose of the bureaucracy and why it exists. And so agencies are the ones who do that. We have different types of agencies, right? We have ones with very broad power, ones that are more narrow, ones that are regulatory, ones that are just performing services. So there's all sorts of different ones there. Glay Hernandez says, can you go over the main ideas of the required documents? Again, I have videos, obviously, that answer all of these questions. That's a super broad question because there's 9 documents. So that's a little broad. So I'm sure I'll be touching on some of those in other questions. Can we use a mechanical pencil or do we need a wooden one if we're taking the written test? So for the multiple choice, yes, you should not use a mechanical pencil for multiple choice, and you should definitely use a pen on the FRQs. Dylan says, do we need to know BICRA and FECA in detail, or just that Citizens United overturned a lot of them? So BICRA is the one that you need to know. I would suggest that you are familiar with the elements of BICRA that has survived and the parts that haven't. So know that it banned soft money contributions and that ban was struck down. Things that are still there, the stand by your ad provision. So the I'm money and I approve this message, like that's still there. So you can keep that. It banned corporations from giving money directly to candidates. That ban is still there as well. It struck down the timings, so saying that they couldn't give money 60 or 30 days before elections, so those are gone. Devlin has a not serious question. Vicky, what if we forget the specific amendment? It shouldn't matter unless that's literally the question. So the only way that would matter is if they said identify the amendment that banned the poll tax, in which case the only answer is the 24th Amendment banned the poll tax. But otherwise, it's okay. Describe it. Megan says, can you explain what party de-alignment is? And the answer is yes, I can. Oh, you want me to actually? Okay, so let me do that. So party de-alignment is the idea of party membership declining, party loyalty or party identification declining. So people going from being Republican or Democrat and becoming independent. So it's not a change where they go from being Republicans to being Democrats or vice versa. It's they go from being associated with a party to not being associated with a party. I cannot help you get a job, I'm sorry. Okay, Ava asks about monetary policy. Can you go over the ways to increase economic activity and to decrease economic activity with monetary policy? So listen, I teach AP macroeconomics also. AP Gov, we don't need to get into that much detail, so I don't want to put more stress on you than is necessary. So I will answer that. What you need to know for monetary policy is that involves two things, the money supply and the interest rates. I want you to know that those two variables are inversely or negatively related, okay? So money supply goes up, interest rates fall. Money supply decreases, interest rates go up. I don't care about why, AP Gov doesn't care about why, okay? My macro students, I care a lot about them knowing why. For you guys, the idea is that if you want to increase economic activity, you should increase the money supply. So create more money, put more money out there, and that will lower interest rates. On the other hand, if you are trying to, and she says decrease economic activity, but really we would say to fight inflation, usually is how we'd say that. So if you're trying to fight inflation, well, inflation means that there are too many dollars chasing too few goods. So what the solution is to reduce the money supply, and those dollars will become more valuable. So lower the money supply, raise interest rates, and that would be how you would fight inflation with monetary policy. Adeline says, can you explain Shaw versus Reno? Again, that's a pretty broad question, but Shaw versus Reno was the racial gerrymandering case. So North Carolina, in order to follow the rules from the Justice Department, they drew a district specifically to increase African-American voter representation, to make a second district that was majority black. The Supreme Court struck that down by a 5-4 ruling, and they banned racial gerrymandering. Or another way to say that is they banned districts being drawn based only on race. The reasoning was that violated the Equal Protection Clause. They took a colorblind interpretation, which says that the Equal Protection Clause bans any racial distinction, when it comes to these sort of things with elections. And so they struck that down. So AP Gov views Shaw versus Reno as a case that somewhat restricted civil rights. Okay. Matthew says, how do we reference the Constitution in the argument essay? I'm not sure what that means. You reference it. You say in the Constitution, or you could be more specific and say in Article 1, but yeah. Melina says, it just scrolled down on me, so I lost hers. I know Melina had asked what was the, what did she ask? I already forgot. Sorry, it jumped down, so I missed that. So now I'm past a bunch of questions, so you probably just put them back in again. Siona says, what stage do nominees secure the party's nomination? So you win the party's nomination officially at the National Convention, or the party convention. They mean the same thing. But we all know, so that question says, when do they secure? They secure it when everybody else drops out, or when they have a majority of the delegates are the answers to that, and it officially happens at the National Convention. Kristen says, what's the general format for the Supreme Court comparison writing? Chris and I have 3 great videos. 2 are videos, and 1 is a live stream I did at 6 p.m. this evening, going over how to write the that. So check those out. Wishcop wants to know about Among Us. COVID says, what's the point of congressional whips? So their job, each party has whips, and they are trying to keep the rest of the party voting in line with the way that the party's voting. So they are a leadership position. So if they're a Democrat, they're trying to make sure that all the Democrats vote yes or no on a particular bill. Trying to convince them, put pressure on them, influence them in one way or another to vote for or against the bill at hand. We have 534 people in here right now. So again, just want to kind of pause and say thank you guys for being here. I hope that this is helping. Obviously, you kind of see the format of this live stream. So if it would be better for you to watch individual videos and just kind of calmly go through those, then by all means do that. I'm going to keep answering questions, though, that I'm getting here. So Sharp says, do you need an intro and conclusion for the essays? No, you do not. Carrie, who always is pointing out that we have the same name even though we spell it differently, says, can you explain lobbying? Sure. Interest groups hire people that are called lobbyists. They are usually very well paid. They are, basically typically lawyers. And it is their job to put pressure and convince congressmen to vote a certain way. So they might provide them with information. Remember that lobbyists are considered policy specialists, whereas congressmen are policy generalists. So like this interest group, they care about one specific issue, right? And they hire somebody who makes sure that members of Congress hear their side. And so they're like, this is what we want people to do. This is what we want them to vote, or how we want them to vote on these bills. They are sometimes in the room where it happens. They're there drafting legislation, suggesting the wording of bills. They might testify at committee hearings to in favor or in opposition to a bill. So they have a lot of influence, again, trying to make sure that bills that their group favors and support pass, and ones that they oppose that they don't pass, or that at least they're not worded in the worst possible way. Alyssa just says linkage institutions ? And we have 4 linkage institutions. These are channels, things that connect people to the government. We have 4 political parties, interest groups, the news media, and elections. Landon says, what's the best way to handle an FRQ if you're blanking or temporarily forgetting something? Landon, honestly, I would say just, kind of relax, take a deep breath, don't panic. You have 100 minutes, so think, just kind of try to think about it. And if you can't think of the word, don't worry about it. You can't think of the name of the case, don't worry about it. You'll get there. Like, relax. You'll be okay. And if you are really hung up on something, then skip it and move on and come back to it later. That would be my suggestion. Maddie says, what's a litmus test? So litmus test is the idea that when a president, and it's not only for this, but usually the example is for nominating federal judges, that the president wants to make sure that the judges he or she is nominating will, rule the way the president would want them to on things, so that they are, pro-life or pro-choice, or pro-gun rights or pro-gun control, or for an expansive federal government or for a limited state government. So they want to know those things. So the litmus test is kind of, we define it as a test of ideological purity. So like Obama wanted liberal judges, Trump wanted conservative judges. Like that's the idea. Is the Illuminati in the Iron Triangle? Yes, it is. Yep. Chloe says, what clauses / principles should we know? So constitutional clauses you want to know, definitely the Commerce Clause, definitely the Necessary and Proper Clause, definitely the Supremacy Clause. So we have Supreme Court cases, required cases about each of those 3. So we definitely want to know those 3 things. And then the Due Process Clause, which is the basis for incorporation, as mentioned earlier. The Equal Protection Clause. Again, we have cases for all 5 of those clauses. So those will be the ones that come to my mind as ones that you definitely 100% want to know. Ava says, can you go over the different types of jurisdiction within the federal courts? So there's basically just 2 types of jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction and original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction means that a specific court is the first court to hear a case. So like typically in federal cases, that would be the district court level, and they would decide whether a person is guilty or not guilty. So that's like the basic trial typically for original jurisdiction, not always. And then appellate jurisdiction, the word appeal is kind of there within that word appellate, and that tells you what appellate jurisdiction is. They hear appeals. So they don't hear the case first. They hear the case after it's already been heard. So we have basically circuit courts of appeals have appellate jurisdiction, and the Supreme Court has both original and appellate, though the vast majority of their cases come from their appellate jurisdiction. Okay. Sober says, what do you believe is the most used Supreme Court case in the exam? That's hard to say. Now that we have 15 required ones, they could be any of them. Parth, and I apologize because I don't know how to pronounce your name. Are these main things to know? Fed documents. Are these the main things to know? Fed documents, court cases, linkage institutions, amendments. I mean, yes, but also like the interaction between the branches of government is a huge part that you're not including there. B.E. Brennan says, explain the main roles of each branch. All right, super. Congress makes laws. Executive branch enforces laws. And the judicial branch interprets laws. So that's your separation of powers and the basics of each of their roles. Daniel, do the bird work for the bourgeoisie. And now I scrolled and questions are gone again, so I apologize. Cherry Blossom says, what is the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court? They're not going to ask you about that. There are 4 things that give the Supreme Court original jurisdiction. So if it's one state suing another state, a citizen from one state suing a different state government. So there's different things like that. If it involves a foreign like diplomat, and involving like a case federal government versus a state, these can all be original jurisdiction, but I don't think they're going to ask that. Tommy, what are presidential powers we need to know? Well, you need to know about their formal powers, the ones that are in the Constitution, and you need to know about their informal powers. So commander-in-chief, pardon power, State of the Union address, nomination power, vetoing legislation, those are all formal powers. Informal powers, big things like executive agreements, executive orders, executive privilege, the bully pulpit, persuasion, negotiation, bargaining, signing statements. These are all informal powers. You need to know about all of them. Those are things that are definitely asked about a lot. Somebody asks, what is the definition of legislative oversight? I mean, so definitions, like these can be defined. So questions that are a little bit, I don't know. But we're just talking about Congress overseeing actions of the executive branch. So holding hearings, investigating, kind of overseeing, like the word oversight implies, where they're trying to make sure that the executive branch is either doing for enforcing law as Congress intended, that they aren't doing anything like corrupt, they're spending the money properly, that they aren't breaking the law. So they'll, as a committee, hold hearings, they'll force people to come and testify, they'll subpoena people. That's congressional oversight. Bryant says, Bryant is talking to somebody else, he's answering. Landon says, okay, I already answered that one. Ducky says, can you explain bully pulpit? So bully pulpit is the idea that everybody always watches the president. Anything the president says or does is newsworthy just by virtue of him or her being president. Therefore, presidents can pretty much talk about anything they want and people will listen. They can make anything that they want newsworthy. And they can use that to put pressure on Congress to do what the president wants them to do. So you saw that with Trump a lot about the wall and stuff like that. And so he's able to, again, force Congress to deal with the stuff he wants them to through that bully pulpit. Donovan asks about Marbury versus Madison. I have no idea. I would be surprised because the facts are complicated in that case. So that does seem like a tricky one for the FRQ. But definitely a multiple choice question because that is the most important Supreme Court case in American history. And prior to the redesign, that used to be the most important case on the AP exam. Now that you need to know the facts are a little complicated on that one, so who knows. Can you go over powers of the President and Congress regarding foreign policy? So that is Ananya. I'm answering questions from the same people multiple times. So for that one, we're thinking of the president obviously as commander-in-chief. That's the big one, so like head of the armed forces. So he or she can order troops in the battle and tells troops where they're going to go, where they're going to fight, what they're going to do. But other things, issuing executive orders, the intelligence services report directly to the president, so that's the Defense Department as well as then CIA, services like that. State Department, they report to him. That's a big advantage that he has when it comes to that. He also gets to nominate the heads of like those cabinet departments and those agencies. So again, there's a lot of influence he has over foreign policy. Congress declares war. That's their main constitutional power. That hasn't mattered much in the last 70 years. So what has mattered, and actually it's 80 years at this point since Congress has declared war, almost 80 full years this year. But Congress does have the power of the purse. That's their big one. They also have congressional oversight. They also confirm like the cabinet appointments. So there are things that they have. They could attempt to invoke the War Powers Resolution, but they can make legislation to try to limit the power of the president in foreign policy and constrain him. J.P. Hawk, the College Board swears that they do not curve AP exams. Sam Campbell, important checks and balances to know. Well, like a bunch. Obviously, vetoing and overriding vetoes. Supreme Court's the easy one. They rule things unconstitutional, so we definitely want to know that and feel comfortable with that. Congress has a bunch of checks on the judicial branch. President really has just kind of two, nominating judges, and sometimes the ability to like ignore a ruling and maybe not enforce it. That's what we really mean when we say ignore. It's usually that they just kind of like, all right, let's not enforce that so actively. Congress has a bunch. So Senate confirms Supreme Court nominations and federal judge nominations, but also they can change the court's jurisdiction. They can change the number of justices on the court. My favorite one for FRQs is that they can propose a constitutional amendment. They can pass a new altered version of a law to try to like, okay, let's get the law that we want and make it constitutional so that now the Supreme Court won't say anything about it. So lots of checks that Congress has. Daniel says, is there a good order on which FRQ we should write? First, second, etc., please? Not really. That's up to you, what you feel comfortable with. Personally, I think that the first three are much more simple, and so I would start there. But yeah, there's really not a right answer to that. Mason just says independent regulatory commission versus independent executive agency. So they're both independent, right? Regulatory commissions, as that name suggests, they make rules and regulations, administrative law. They have administrative discretion so that they can, what they are doing is they are regulating a specific industry or sector of the U.S. economy. And so they make rules governing it. So we can think about the SEC, Securities and Exchanges Commission, for example, and they regulate things on Wall Street. The Federal Reserve regulates or has a role in regulating banks. And so they make rules, administrative law. Independent executive agencies, they perform a government service. So they are not typically regulatory. At least they're not regulatory over a specific industry. So we think of things like NASA, space travel, exploration, science, research. We think of the EPA, protecting the environment. Like these are examples of independent executive agencies. Lindsay says, do we need to know acts? For example, the motor voter law. So motor voter law is one that you probably should know by name. So that was a law in 1993. That its purpose was to increase voter registration and turnout by basically saying when you apply for a driver's license, they can offer you the paper, or they have to offer you the paperwork so that you can sign up and register to vote. George says, what would be a good score out of 55 for multiple choice to pass? So again, George, the big thing is you have to, kind of do well on both because half your score is the FRQ. So you could literally get 55 out of 55 on the multiple choice, and you're only going to get a 2 if you don't get some points on the FRQs. So this is a really tough question to answer. my general rule of thumb, I don't remember what I said in the video because I made a video about this specifically, like as I looked over the data. So trust that video more than what I'm saying now. But typically, I would say that for a 5, you want to be in the neighborhood of about 49 points or so. For a 4, in the area of like 42, 43-ish points. For a passing score, at least like 37. I don't think you want to be lower than that to kind of give yourself as good a chance as possible to, I almost said to win, but it is kind of winning to pass this AP exam. Tommy says, do we need exact foundational document quotes? No. They do not expect you to. And if you were to use exact quotes, it's going to really look like you're cheating. You're not expected to know quotes. You're expected to understand the concepts and the ideas. Trey says about, okay, Lopez, were you saying it increased Congress's power? No, Lopez did not. So that FRQ, remember, was comparing U.S. versus Lopez, which reduced and limited Congress's power because it said that the Commerce Clause, that not everything affects interstate commerce. That's what Lopez said. So Congress could not pass the Gun-Free School Zones Act. Well, they did pass it, but that was unconstitutional because guns at school did not substantially affect interstate commerce. So Lopez is a victory for states' rights and a reduction of congressional power. The other case in that essay, that FRQ, that one was the one that increased Congress's power. Kate the Great says, what would you say for the Constitutional Clause of Marbury versus Madison? I would say the right answer, Kate. Duh. So will you. The answer is Supremacy Clause. So we normally think of the Supremacy Clause as being the Constitution is, we normally think of it as being federal government is above state governments, which is true. The Supremacy Clause also means that the Constitution is above laws. So a law that comes into conflict with the U.S. Constitution cannot be valid because the Constitution is superior or supreme to that federal law. And Hamilton describes that for us really nicely in Federalist number 78. JD asked about how much of Congress is required for certain actions. So he's asking about the fractions. 2/3 is required to override vetoes. A simple majority is necessary to pass legislation, which just means 50% plus 1. So 51 in the Senate, 218 in the House, if they're both full. Impeachment, the House impeaches with a simple majority. The Senate has the trial and convicts with 2/3 vote. And the only other one I can think of, well, no, there's a couple others. Treaties are ratified by the Senate with a 2/3 vote. And cloture, to end a filibuster or hold, is a 3/5 vote in the Senate. I already did PACs for super PACs. And yes, I'm reading the AP exam again this year, so I might score some of your responses. Hey, you guys should write in your FRQs, you should be like, this has been a money production. I probably won't be allowed to score those, but that's okay. But if you do that, then other teachers will know and be like, oh, who are all these students that are writing such great FRQs? It sounds like they're all about this money production. He must know what he's doing. So that might be, I'd appreciate that. And it would make me smile if I'm scoring your FRQ and I see that. Again, just want to say thank you to everybody who's here right now. 541 people here watching. We are at 38 minutes in. So thank you guys so much. If you do want to, hit that like button for me, I appreciate it. And do want to thank you for that. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure that you subscribe and, check out everything. I'm sure some of you are really going to be, binging hard these last few hours, so I have good stuff for you, so make sure you do that. Caden says, are rubrics for the FRQs available? And the answer is for some of them, yeah, on AP Classroom or on College Board's website. There are some that are publicly available, so check those out. Annabelle says, are amendments part of the Constitution? Well, yeah, they are changes and additions to the Constitution, but they are then part of the Constitution. She says, can I state an amendment as an applicable section of the Constitution? And the answer is yes, you can. Unless they are specific and say like articles, or if they said original Constitution. So original Constitution means pre-amendments, but otherwise, yes, you can. If it just says U.S. Constitution, amendments are good to go. Bahamian Nerd says, how many of, and it jumped down on me as I was reading that. I'm trying to scroll up. I don't see it, sorry. It's gone. Potato No Life, I already answered that question about fiscal and monetary policy. Henry, what do you think about the strategy of crossing out the letters on the FRQ? So like I said in the tips and tricks video, you can do it. It can't hurt. I don't think it's a huge deal. So do it if it makes you feel better. It definitely doesn't hurt. My biggest thing is make sure all of your answers are separate paragraphs. That makes it really easy for the reader. I don't know how to say your name. I like it, but Ayana, I think it's Ayana Durepo. Where does it say that the Supreme Court has the power to declare things unconstitutional? The Constitution doesn't say it. So that's Marbury versus Madison, established judicial review. So yes, the court gave themselves that power. But Hamilton did talk about that in Federalist number 78. So this is kind of a power that's more born out of like tradition and common law than it was from the Constitution, which does lead to controversy, and it does cause some people to question the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Siona, are the rights of the Bill of Rights clauses? Okay, so a clause is a part or a section of something. Okay, so there are clauses within amendments. So the First Amendment, for example, we have the Free Speech Clause, which says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. That's the Free Speech Clause. The First Amendment also has the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It also has the Free Exercise Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So its clauses are more specific. Roxanne just joined. Oh, Roxanne, I answered that already about amendments. That dumb artist, can you please go over line of reasoning? Also, the first FRQ about where Congress gets their power. What do I need to study for that? I'm not sure which FRQ that is. Congress gets their power from the Constitution. Article 1. Section 8 provides the powers of Congress. I don't know if that's what you're asking. Line of reasoning, again, don't overcomplicate this. The thesis statement is actually quite simple. It's hugely important, but it's not that complicated. Use the words in the prompt. Make a claim. So pick federal government. It's better for the federal to be stronger, or the states, or whatever. Pick one. Use the words in the prompt. Say the word because. And then the line of reasoning is, and kind of here's the direction I'm going. Because the federal government can make unified policy for the nation, or because states are closer to the people. It does not need to be anything that's, overly in-depth and in detailed and all of that stuff. Althea says, lame duck, ? So that's at the end of a president's term. Kind of technically it would be when, after the election, and so you already know who the next president is, and it's not them. And so they don't have much power. It's kind of like everybody's really focused on the incoming president, not worried about the outgoing president. So this is a moment of weakness for the president. Seven Status says, can you explain the bureaucracy's relations with the other branches of government? So if we're thinking of like checks and balances, Supreme Court, always they can rule on the constitutionality of things. So that's really the only relationship there, is that they could strike down a bureaucratic rule, regulation, or action. The president is head of the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy is the executive branch. So he can issue executive orders. He can reorganize the bureaucracy. He can be like, do this, don't do that. Talk about climate change, don't talk about climate change, the EPA. Like they can do those sorts of things, direct like their mission, their goals, all of that stuff. Congress, they conduct oversight. They create the bureaucratic agencies and departments. They can also abolish the agencies and departments. They also have power of the purse, and so they can defund or increase the funding of particular agencies. And so there are some agencies that Republicans like more, and there's some agencies that Democrats like more. And so, we see where the politics definitely does matter quite a bit when it comes to these sorts of things. Grace says, can you briefly talk about each of the required Federalist Papers? I mean, that's so broad. Again, just going super briefly, because you said briefly. Federalist 10, large republic is the best way to control the negative effects of factions. Federalist number 51, all about checks and balances, separation of powers, trying to keep limited government from becoming too powerful, how to keep a government limited. Federalist number 70 is that a unitary executive is more desirable or protects people's rights better, protects liberty and security better, and is more checked by the public than a plural executive. Federalist number 78 is all about an independent judiciary that has the power of judicial review and has life tenure in order so that judges are actually independent and can use that power of judicial review to strike down congressional overreaches and things that Congress and the president do that are unconstitutional. Okay, what is a DBQ? Not for AP Gov. Can you go over Brutus number 1? So Brutus number 1, again, is an anti-federalist paper, opposes the ratification of the Constitution, warns that the power to tax, the having a standing army, the necessary and proper clause, the supremacy clause, these are all going to lead to like tyranny, oppression, the destruction of liberty, the destruction of state governments. So Brutus number 1 prefers for power to be held locally, state and local governments, more democratic, more participatory. Not really worried about like diversity, not worried about protecting minority rights, because he's like, no, whatever, majority rule, that's what we want. Georgia asks, could you explain the difference between conservative, liberal, libertarian? All right, so I already did Keynesian and SupplySide. I mean, conservatives, liberals, libertarians is so broad. Libertarians are easy. They want maximum freedom, okay? So as much freedom as possible, both in economic and in social issues. Conservatives want economic freedom, but typically want more government and more regulation on like personal individual decisions. So they typically are stronger law and order, more crime and punishment, pro-life, pro-death penalty, like stuff like that. Liberals, the opposite of conservatives. They want more government regulation in the economy, higher taxes, more government spending on social things. Then they want a weaker government on those personal areas. So more worried about rights of the accused, less worried about crime and punishment, pro-choice, like pro-drug legalization, stuff like that. Can you explain strict scrutiny? I can. I strongly doubt that will be on the AP exam. Strict scrutiny is like, we have 3 different levels of judicial review. So what we're talking about is the Supreme Court doesn't, when they are reviewing laws and trying to decide whether they're constitutional or not, there are different levels of like how strictly, like to use this word, are they scrutinizing that particular law. So like when they walk into court, who has the advantage? Does the lawmaker, Congress, have the advantage, or is the assumption that they can't do that? So strict scrutiny is the idea that the government really shouldn't be making this law, if at all possible. So if it's going to be upheld, it needs to be extremely narrow. There needs to be a really important reason why they would have to do something. So for example, any law that's involving race, if they're going to make a law that has a different policy for a person because of their race, that is going to be, they're going to use strict scrutiny. And they're going to have to, the burden of proof is going to be very difficult for the federal government or any government to prove that it was necessary to make this racial distinction. So that's strict scrutiny. So the most likely outcome when the court uses strict scrutiny is that they're going to strike down that policy. Adding the money thing wouldn't hurt our grades, right? No. People write notes all the time on AP exams. Some of them are hilarious. Are there any dates we have to memorize? Nope, you don't need to know dates. That guy, I kind of just did the political ideologies for answering another person just a moment ago. Okay, somebody's answering a question there. Do we have to know the difference between district and circuit courts? I mean, maybe, maybe not, but you could see a chart. There's been charts with those before. So again, district courts, that's just the lowest level, original jurisdiction. Circuit courts, they have appellate jurisdiction. So they're in between the district court and the Supreme Court level. John, can you explain the application of the Commerce Clause in U.S. versus Lopez? I kind of already did a few minutes ago. So again, they were limiting Congress's ability to use the Commerce Clause because they said not everything affects interstate commerce. And if it doesn't, then they can't do it. And those things would be reserved to the states via the 10th Amendment. Ananya says that Federalists can also argue for a representative democracy to protect the people from their own turbulent passions. Yes. So Madison talks about being optimistic that the representatives, are going to kind of be more statesmanlike, that they are going to have the good of the nation in their heart and mind, and so they are less likely to be, swayed by these momentary turbulent passions. And so, yes, he says representative democracy is better than democracy, direct democracy, or he calls it pure democracy. Addison, I'm sorry, I can't give you the answer key. Rad, what gives Congress the power to oversee the executive branch, bureaucracy, Constitution, or somewhere else? So that's a good question. Remember what the executive branch's job is. It's to enforce the laws that Congress made. So all Congress has to do is make a law, basically saying, okay, we're going to give ourselves. So when they write a law, a lot of times as part of the legislation, so the answer is legislation, typically. They'll write the law and say, within that law, that it's subject to oversight by such and such committee, and here's how the oversight will be organized. So, and then there are specific types of oversight that are in the Constitution, like impeachment is a form of oversight. Advice and consent is a kind of a form of oversight. Let's not call it that. I don't like that. Don't say that same thing. But impeachment is. Daniel, what's the best way to approach the reasoning section of the argument essay? The best way is that you have to show that your response is that the evidence that you chose supports your claim. So something like, this supports my claim because, and now you explain, you elaborate, you provide evidence, you give an example to show how the evidence from your document now supports the claim that you made in your thesis statement. Miguel, yo, okay. Wording, do you have a specific case legislation in the rebuttal? No, you do not have to mention specific things in the rebuttal. You can be more general, overarching claim about the opposing position, yes. And then the important thing, as wording mentions, is to provide your rebuttal, your concession, not a confession, or refutation. Remember, if you are conceding, you are not saying, and they're right, my essay was wrong. You can't get that point because then you just undermine what you spent 3 paragraphs claiming. So you have to still, even in a concession, you have to come back and reassert why your response was in fact the best response. Lauren, can you go over the differences between the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments? So, I mean, they're different. 5th Amendment is kind of more overarching, so you're still kind of being arrested and investigated in the 5th Amendment. So no self-incrimination when you're arrested or on trial. Right to a grand jury to indict you on certain charges. So it's more broad. It's kind of laying out your due process as a whole. 6th Amendment are criminal trials, so where you'd go to jail potentially. 7th Amendment is civil. 7th Amendment is civil cases. Civil means like lawsuits, cases involving money. All right, I scrolled and it just jumped on me. So again, I'm going to end up skipping a lot of people here. Sorry. Michelle put some big exclamation points in hers so I can see it. Should we know specific dates? No. You do not need to know the dates. If you're a person that knows your history, dates can help. But no, you do not need to know the dates. Black Steel Wolf, I was answering somebody. Okay, answering somebody. Niddy, I'm sorry, Nidai, I like. What are some of the events and time periods you should know? Vietnam War, War on Terror. You know FRQ requires you to have the outside knowledge. You would not need to know anything about the Vietnam War or the War on Terror. If you do, it can't hurt. It can only help. And hopefully you were taught and given, your AP Gov materials in the context of lots of real-life examples. But this is not a history class. You do not need to know them. Okay? Again, it just kind of jumped on me. Thank you, but what are the outstanding differences between 3 different court systems? All right, so I've done the courts. Evan says, what is a regional realignment? So this is a long-lasting shift in party loyalty in a specific region of the country. So the best primary example is the South. Southeastern states were strongly Democratic for 130 plus years, and now they are strongly Republican. So you have where that region was once associated with one party and is now associated with the other party. My lips are getting dry. I have a fan on here so that I don't get hot and sweat too much. But I'm talking a lot, and now my lips are drying up. You see the physical things I put myself through? Gated Garden Homes says, I forget, what is pork barreling and log rolling again? So don't call it pork barreling. Call it pork barrel legislation. And so that's legislation that provides money, jobs, tangible benefits for a member of Congress's home district. So that's kind of how they get themselves reelected, is they're like, look at all the pork we brought you back. Look at all these benefits, the jobs, money, the whatever. Log rolling is where members of Congress will be like, all right, hey, I'll vote for that bill that you have coming up next week if you vote for the bill that I have coming up tomorrow. I know you don't care about my thing and I don't care about your thing, but if we trade votes, so log rolling is vote trading, maybe both of our things will pass. Okay. Ethan, at what point does something trip the Commerce Clause? Couldn't gun school affect students' education, therefore indirectly affecting interstate commerce? Where's the line? All right, Ethan, real talk. The answer is whatever the Supreme Court says, and they don't always say the same thing, okay? So in U.S. versus Lopez, it was a 5-4 ruling. So 4 justices said exactly what you said, all right? And if you watch my video, I give you quotes from the dissenting opinions, and they said what Ethan says. It's what a majority of the Supreme Court rules. So that line is not clearly defined. It is up to them to interpret whether something affects interstate commerce or not. In the last 2 decades, they've started to kind of go and to narrow that what affects interstate commerce a little bit more. Typically, conservatives are going to narrow it a little bit more, and liberals would expand it more. That is an oversimplification and not always true, what I just said, but that is, as a simplification, relatively true. Selective incorporation explanation. So again, the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause provides the basis for applying the Bill of Rights to the states. That means that states are now restricted by the Bill of Rights the same way that states are restricted by the Bill of Rights. And as a result, that means that state power is decreasing, that they are getting weaker. But this does not happen in the snap of a finger at one time. Rather, this happens selectively on a case-by-case-by-case basis. Over time, this occurs, okay? So, selective incorporation is exactly that. It's the application of the Bill of Rights to the states on a case-by-case basis. So, starting in 1925 with a non-required case, Gitlow versus New York, and moving forward until 2019, we just had a case last 2 years ago. And the Supreme Court has, one at a time, been applying aspects of the Bill of Rights to the states. Dylan says, can we abbreviate on FRQs? Yes, if your abbreviation is something that we should all know. I wouldn't abbreviate something that isn't obvious. But yes, you can absolutely abbreviate. Henry, explain iron triangles. But Henry's yelling at me in all caps. I don't like that. So I'm going to skip that one. Riley says, explain 4th Amendment. So no unreasonable searches and seizures. The Supreme Court has interpreted that in a few ways. Illegally obtained evidence cannot be used against you in trial. So if they do search you illegally and they happen to find something, they can't use that evidence against you. That's called the exclusionary rule. They have also said that the 4th Amendment protects you against like warrantless searches of your cell phone, both like what's on your phone as well as your cell phone metadata. Those are both protected as a result of the 4th Amendment. They need to get a warrant to search those things. Chloe says, should reasoning be its own paragraph in the argument essay? You could. Personally, I like to do evidence 1 as its own paragraph and then evidence 2 as its own paragraph. So my style is 4 paragraphs. Thesis statement paragraph, evidence 1 paragraph, evidence 2 paragraph, and alternative perspective paragraph. That's my preference. There's more than one right way to do it. Okay, just jump down again. Brandon says, can you briefly explain the Maryland SCOTUS case and McCulloch one? So McCulloch versus Maryland. So those are the same. That's one case. And so that was, can Congress create a national bank? That's the first question. And if Congress can create a national bank, okay, well, can states tax the national government? And McCulloch versus Maryland is a overwhelming, resounding victory for federal power. They rule that, yes, Congress can create a national bank. Even though the Constitution doesn't say that they can. They can. Why? because they have implied powers. They said that the necessary and proper clause means that there are other things Congress can do. They are not limited to only their expressed or enumerated powers. My throat is starting to get really dry too. So just a warning, I can't go on forever here. We are at 1 hour right now. So again, just want to pause and thank you for being here. We have 562 people on right now. That's unbelievable. It's amazing. So thank you guys so much for being here right now. I hope that this review is helping and that I'm getting to answer some of the questions and the things that might have been stressing you. So thank you for being here. If you do want to hit that like button for me, again, I thank you so much. Again, if you want to check out in the description, there's a link to the Ultimate Review Packet for some practice tests at this point, study guides that have answers to all of these questions that are being asked right now, in all honesty. And also, just making sure that you subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, a lot of people are asking about iron triangles. I don't really understand why. I don't know if this is like a joke that I'm not in on. Iron triangles, congressional committees, interest groups, bureaucratic agencies. The idea is that this is a relationship between the three parts, that they are influencing policy. The interest group wants policies that will benefit their membership. So they provide campaign funding to the members of Congress. Members of Congress are in charge of the budget for the agency. So the member of Congress is basically like, okay, bureaucratic agency, make rules and regulations to benefit the interest group. Why does the agency do that? Because Congress controls their budget. So you have where basically member of Congress gets fundraising campaign support from the interest group. The agency gets a nice budget from Congress, and the interest group gets favorable regulations from the agency and Congress. That's Iron Triangle. Criticism is that sounds very much like elite democracy, because these people are in the room where it happens, and they are making policies, and they're getting policies to benefit them and not everybody else necessarily. All right, thank you. A lot of people are now answering the interest group thing as I scroll down, so that's good. Some people are saying thank you. I assume that's because they assumed I was going to end at 8:59, which I definitely plan to. KW says difference between 9th and 10th Amendments. So the 9th Amendment says that basically the fact that some things aren't mentioned in the first 8 amendments should not be interpreted as meaning that that the government can take away those other rights. Essentially, we have unenumerated rights of the people, rights that aren't written down. We still have other rights. And in the 10th Amendment, it says, it's talking about like power of government, everything that's not delegated to the federal government or denied to the states belongs to the states. So it's kind of like a leftover. This is federalism in the 10th Amendment. Everything else belongs to the states. Can you explain U.S. versus FEC? I've never heard of that, so I don't know if ABOB is trying to say Citizens United versus FEC. I'm guessing so. But Citizens United is a very complicated case, but it involves some restrictions on the timing of campaign ads and giving money and raising money for politics. And it used the First Amendment's free speech clause to basically strike down those bans in the timing and to allow corporations and labor unions to raise unlimited amounts of money for political speech, as long as they don't give that money directly to a candidate. It must be independent. Okay. Sophia, can you briefly review executive agency, independent regulatory? Yeah, I did already do it. I know, I'm sorry if you're still confused. Regulatory commissions, again, they are regulating, making rules, that's what that means, over certain specific industries or areas of the economy. That's what an independent regulatory commission does. Executive agencies perform some kind of service for the public. It can be research-based, scientific, protecting the environment. These are services. So it's not making rules that affect a certain sector of the economy, like hospitals or banks or something. It's more broad. I think I did already explain the 14th Amendment. I apologize. Elite versus participatory versus pluralist is the other one, so revolutionary. Elite democracy is the idea that you can't really trust the people. So we're going to have like this filtered, people can vote, people can do some things, but they can't vote directly on policy. You can't really trust them. You don't want them having too much power. So we need to have some kind of filter, something to limit the power. So let people have some power, but not too much. Let people who are smarter, wealthier, wiser, more patriotic, let them make policy. Participatory is like group-based activism, so political parties, interest groups, so have multiple, like everybody should form groups with people who they agree with, and then let those groups battle it out for power and for policy making. And participatory is let people have influence. So we're thinking of like marching, protesting, demonstrating, voting. Those are all examples of participatory democracy. NF Rocks, I did explain super PACs earlier. Sorry about that. Oh, you're saying thank you for the iron triangles. Funny. All right, James, AP teacher, shows my videos. That's awesome. I appreciate Mr. Boxleitner. Shout out to Mr. Boxleitner. Sorry if I said your name wrong. Jillian mentions we do have time, place, and manner restrictions on free speech. And so it's the idea, again, that they're saying, well, we're not restricting free speech. We're just regulating the time, the place, and the way in which that speech is kind of broadcast. So like if you want to march or demonstrate, you could be required to have a permit in order to do that. So there can be limits on that speech. Again, the specifics of that, it changes so often in some ways, but know that there can be those kinds of limits. All right, Lauren is answering something. Joe thinks he's funny. You don't need to worry about the Pendleton Act. It's not on there. Devolution is power going from the federal government back to the states, so like a reduction of federal power. We associate that with the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, 1990s even. So the Welfare Reform Act is an example of that, so giving the states power over certain things. Zoe says, where is Commerce Clause from? It's in Article 1, Section 8. It just says Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states. And from that, the Supreme Court has interpreted that extremely broadly to now say they can regulate anything affecting interstate commerce, even if it's not actually interstate and even if it's not actually commerce. Revolutionary, I don't know of a term for that. Can you explain devolution? Just did. Yes, I'm going to be a grader this year. What is the difference, Camille says, between eligible voters and other types of voters? That sounds like a trick question. If you're not an eligible voter, then you'd be an ineligible voter and not allowed to vote. So I don't know what you're asking. I'm sorry. Articles of the Constitution. So again, the first three you want to know by name. Article 1, Congress. Article 2, Presidency or Executive Branch. Article 3, Judiciary. Sure, Article 5 is the amendment process. Article 6 is federal supremacy. And Article 7 is the ratification process. Of those, maybe Article 6, federal supremacy, but I don't think they would really care if you knew the name Article 6. Article 4 is interstate relationships, by the way. What is one thing shouldn't bring tomorrow, sir? Says Grace. I'm an icon. Well, I'm glad I'm an icon. I don't really understand what is one thing shouldn't bring tomorrow, sir. Don't bring guns or drugs to school. That would be bad. Lemon test is used to, so Arjun, lemon test is used to determine whether a policy violates the Establishment Clause. So is that excessive entanglement of church and state kind of a thing? Maggie says, is it better to have a conclusion or more well-developed set of body paragraphs? Well, Maggie, you do not need a conclusion. So it's absolutely better to develop your body paragraphs better. You're using reasoning, you're explaining, that's much more important. Lily, party polarization is when we see like this expanding gap between what Republicans and Democrats believe in. So Republicans going this way becoming more conservative, Democrats going this way becoming more liberal, they're getting further apart. Chloe, what can the majority party in Congress do? I don't like that she's yelling at me. Stop yelling at me, Chloe. Majority party in Congress can pass legislation, confirmation, like they're the ones who can kind of do stuff. Pie in the sky, telling the same joke that somebody else told already. Did that already. Prior restraint is basically censorship. Yeah, we can use those terms interchangeably. Soft money or contributions to political parties for the purpose of party building. It was banned under Bikra, and it was unbanned by Citizens United. Letter from Birmingham Jail, Benji asks about, is just gorgeous, beautiful thing. You should absolutely read it. We view it in AP Gov as like a demand for the fulfillment of the words of the Declaration of Independence, of the, we the people in the Constitution, all men created equal from the Declaration, like all that stuff, the natural rights. It's like a modern demand for the fulfillment of those words for all Americans. Specifically, obviously, we're thinking of the Civil Rights Movement and Black Americans, but this is what he's writing for. Okay, so it is 10 after 9. This has been 70 minutes at this point. Minuet is confused on a midnight judge. This isn't a push. Don't worry about midnight judges. And the details of Marbury versus Madison. The long story short is that somebody sued. I'm not going to do the whole story. It's in the video. And again, you don't really need to worry about this to an extent, I don't think. Somebody sued and wanted to get his job given to him by the Secretary of State, who wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. And what the Supreme Court ruled was that the law by which he was able to file his lawsuit, which was the Judiciary Act of 1789, that law was actually unconstitutional. Therefore, Marbury wasn't actually allowed to sue. That's pretty much the idea there. So I just did soft money a moment ago. Glenn Watson's also saying hard money, so that's money that's going to be contributed directly to the candidate. It is regulated. It is restricted. We know the names of people who do it. It's a limited amount of money you're allowed to give. What's up, Mr. Gallo? Appreciate you playing my videos in class. Polling. So again, you have different types of polls. Tracking polls follow changes in opinion over time, usually for the same exact question, like presidential approval ratings, that kind of thing. Benchmark polls are done before, when a candidate is thinking about becoming a candidate. Should they run, they try to find that out. Exit or entrance polls are taken on election day as people enter or leave the polling site. Again, trying to figure out who's actually voting that day, what's the demographics, what's the major issues that are causing people to vote, that kind of stuff. All right, I did restraint and activism. Thank you, Kayla. I appreciate you. Executive privilege, Vivian, is when presidents basically refuse to cooperate with congressional investigations, with congressional oversight, and are like, no, we don't have to do that because I'm president, so you don't get to know that. So they just refuse to cooperate with those investigations. I agree, Alfredo. This is not as hard as many think. We're going to be good. I did do PACs and super PACs earlier. I'm sorry. Don't worry about the 11th Amendment, Ethan. That's not going to be on the test. Privileges and immunities, again, probably not going to be on the test, but it's basically the idea that states are not allowed to discriminate against people from other states. Yes, you can cite the Constitution and get credit if you mean a specific section. It doesn't matter. Owen, for the argument essay, do we need to address the opposing view and have a rebuttal? Yes, you do. I don't know if I already said this, but what's up, Mr. Gallo? That's from Caitlin. I did Super PACs. I did Citizens United. GBAL, all of your 15 or prior cases are the most important. Restraint and activism, I did. Okay, so as we wind up, because we're going to be out of here by 9:15, again, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. You've spent a lot of your day with me today, so we have 500 people still here right now. So that's really awesome. Those of you testing on May 20th, I'll be back. I have more live streams that we'll be doing over the next 2.5 weeks as we get ready for this exam. My throat is really starting to bother me right now. I haven't talked this much in a day this year, so that's not really true, but definitely being virtual, I talk less than normal. So I'm about to wrap this up, and again, want to thank everybody. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I promise they're pretty much all answered in other videos that I have. So thank you again. I hope that everybody has a great night. Make sure you do get some sleep. Try to have a little bit of breakfast in the morning. Go into that test strong. I want you guys to relax. You've worked hard, you've prepared. This year has been insane. Do the best that you can. That's all you can do. At the end of the day, it's just one test. This is not a defining moment in your life, one way or the other. That said, I believe in excellence and always striving to do the best that you possibly can. So give it your best for these next, 11 hours until that test starts. Study, prepare, get ready. Don't stress yourself out. Don't lose hair. Don't get an eating disorder because this test, is ruining your life. Don't do that. You'll be okay. All right, I promise. Do the best that you can. That's all anybody can really ever ask of you. So give it your best. Don't overcomplicate things. Keep them simple as you can on the FRQs. And yeah, I hope that everybody does well tomorrow. Hope that you have fun. And I hope that I'm seeing lots of comments and things from you guys in the next couple of days coming back, telling me tomorrow how incredibly easy the AP exam was and that it went so well. That's the kind of stuff I hope that I see on Twitter tomorrow and, in the comments and stuff like that. So again, thank you guys so much. A lot of you already have clearly hit that like button. If you haven't and you want to, you can. Subscribe, tell people, tell your friends that are panicking right now. Gabriel, what's up? So shout out to Gabriel. He asked for it, so he gets it. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a great night, and I wish you all the best tomorrow. So one last time for some of you, but I have other videos, so you can hear it. Just keep watching other videos. This has been a La Money production. See you guys later.